Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Christina Bob, Corey Lewandowski. These aren't necessarily household names in the UK, but these are people that were around Planet Trump in sort of 2016 and 2020.
Washington Whispers with Alistair Dawber on Times Radio.
Yeah, every Thursday at this time we cross the Atlantic to find out the very latest of what's happening in Washington with our man in Washington correspondent, Alistair Dawber. Alistair, are you in Washington?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Matt.
And I have to give you a hug, Alistair, after I met Mr. and Mrs. Dawber this week in Chorley. We had a nice chat, and they said to say hello.
Oh, hi. Did they buy a book?
No, I don't think they. No, they didn't buy. No, I know we didn't have any to sell. So we had a nice chat and we had a photo taken, and they told us that you're now coming back in May.
I believe I am
because of Liverpool. not because of the city, because you're a Liverpool fan and you want to come back for Klopp's last game.
That's right. Amongst other things.
Amongst other things. Right, we should talk about the day job then. Joe Biden and Donald Trump's election strategy problem. So earlier in the show, we heard from Lynn Vavrek, who's an American political scientist, and she told me that she thought that Joe Biden was struggling to communicate his success on the economy. Because the economy is doing quite well in America. It's doing better than it is in the UK, but he doesn't seem to be enjoying any bounce from that. And she said it's in part because Donald Trump, who's obviously his rival, became incredibly popular when he was president because during the pandemic, the government literally sent Americans checks in the post during the pandemic to help save jobs.
When people say, wow, I feel like I had more money to spend when Trump was president than I have now, that's not delusional. On average, real disposable income was high because of those COVID payments. So Biden has to work around that messaging.
It's really interesting, Alistair. And I think people in Britain didn't fully understand, whereas in the UK, there was the furlough, which paid people's wages. There was very sort of business support things. There wasn't sort of everyone gets a check in the post.
That's right. I mean, I think she's referring there to the CARES Act, which was signed during COVID. And every American with a social security number got at least $1,200 in a check through the post. And of course, the other thing to add on to that is, of course, there was nothing to spend your money on. So people had their income from the government. They might have had income from jobs as well if they were still going. And there was nothing to spend their money on. So they felt rich. These payments continued under Joe Biden. So when Joe Biden came into office, he passed more acts and checks arrived again. But first of all, people think that Donald Trump was responsible for it. In the first instance, he was. But also then the discussion then gets into what happened to the economy after COVID and when Joe Biden came into office. And inflation spiked. It got very, very high a couple of years ago, more than 7%, which in US terms is extraordinarily high. That's still a stick with which Trump beats Biden, the Biden administration now. Now, it's come down a lot since then, and Biden says that his policies, his benchmark act since he became president, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's all his work to put more money in people's pockets. But inflation's still high. Gas prices, the petrol prices, as we call them, gas prices, they're still very high. Food's very high, still very expensive. And so people probably did feel a bit rich when Donald Trump was in power. I think that's a fair point.
It's really interesting that, and it's a reminder of the Brits try to follow what's going on and get their heads around what Donald Trump's popularity. Yeah, it's a reminder of what was actually going on the ground. Talking of Donald Trump, which obviously he'll like. Interesting story today about him rehiring controversial former advisors, getting the old gang back together, even if they might be crooks, allegedly.
Well, some of them are.
Some of them actually are. I was going to say, I hesitated on saying allegedly. Some of them are literally convicted.
Convicted, Paul Manafort being one of them. Yeah, this is a story that we did yesterday about like Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Christina Bob, Corey Lewandowski. These aren't necessarily household names in the UK, but these are people that were around Planet Trump in sort of 2016 and 2020. The real big difference, I think, between now and 4 years ago is the professionalism of the Trump campaign. It's really slick. They're really switched on. They've brought in people, again, not necessarily household names, but there's a woman called Susie Wiles. There's a guy called Chris LaCivita. These guys are really, really professional, experienced campaigners. But Trump came into power, got his political boost from some of these other figures that are perhaps less professional. I say in the case of Paul Manafort, a convicted prisoner, he went to prison for fraud. There's also concerns about his links to Russia as well. But he seems to like these people. These are the people that sort of propelled him into office in the first place. And it would appear from various reports this week that he's speaking to them again. They might get sort of semi-official or official roles in the campaign as we go through the next few months. I think we'll be hearing a bit more about them.
It's fascinating. And then Joe Biden is talking about gas prices, a new policy on petrol cars.
That's right. So one of his sort of big flagship things when he was campaigning in 2020 and then when he came into office was to cut greenhouse gas emissions. America is one of the biggest polluters, if not the biggest polluter on the planet, and the car industry is one of the main contributors to that. He last year announced this sort of wide-ranging policy where new car sales by 2032, 67% of them would be electric cars. Now, the US infrastructure isn't ready for that yet. People are very suspicious about electric cars. And of course, Donald Trump thinks they're a waste of time and will damage the US economy. Biden came out yesterday. The policy has been watered down a bit. It's going to be just over 50% of new car sales beyond 2032. But he's really pushing the climate and the climate change and his green agenda as something I think that he thinks will attract voters or certainly bring out Democratic voters in November.
Just finally then, Alistair, do you like a B-Day?
I don't have a B-Day. Becoming very popular.
I was slightly baffled by this. Yeah, so there's a story in the Times today that Americans have fallen in love with the B-Day, fueled in part by the rising price of toilet rolls.
Well, I was looking when our colleague suggested you might want to talk about this. I was looking at the amount of toilet roll that Americans get through each year, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's so much higher than any other country on the planet. So it would seem that again, back to inflation, toilet roll as well as gas prices and food seems to be the thing that's upsetting people, and this has led to a bit of a drive in sales of B-days. Not one in my flat, unfortunately.
Well, give it time. Have a word with your parents, see if they'll buy you one. Alistair, lovely to speak to you. Alistair Dawber there, our man in Washington correspondent of the Times and Sunday Times. And lots of coverage, of course, of the big US election online at thetimes.co.uk. And Times subscribers can sign up to the US newsletter as well, which comes out every week and really rounds up everything you need to know. Got a bit more detail if you want to know what's going on in the US.